Trump captured the sitting president of Venezuela,
Nicolás
Maduro. That's a big deal, but could there be a reason that justifies it? In order to answer that, we need to understand exactly what's at stake. There's a significant bit of news about a new agreement between Russia, China, and Iran against the West. But what does that have to do with Venezuela? This is part of a global geopolitical struggle for power. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's give some context. Maduro is being charged with narco-terrorism, basically being in cahoots with the drug cartels, working with them, promoting their actions, and allowing a free space for drug trade, especially going into the US. Maduro, whose presidency has never been accepted by the US, going all the way back to Obama, they've never liked Maduro. But this is a big move, to go into a foreign country with military force to capture the sitting president for what's being framed by the Trump administration as a law enforcement issue. This is also clearly connected to the issue that Trump campaigned on, migration. A lot of migrants coming in from Venezuela through the Mexican border into the US. But there's some deeper reasons, and I want to dig into that. Okay, so let's look at this Axios article. Axios is a fairly balanced resource that analyzes topics like these. Here are the 6 big reasons that the US sought to topple the Venezuelan leader. Okay, public enemy number 1 in the Americas. Okay, to the White House, and again, this goes back to way before Trump. Maduro was a source of problems that extended well beyond Venezuela. They see him as a bad guy, helped prop up other bad guys in the Western Hemisphere. So he's sort of part of this axis of anti-American sentiments in South America, or south of the border with Mexico. So they're an ideological enemy. They're in opposition to what America stands for in its own sphere of influence in the West. Cocaine trafficking. Okay, so this goes into the drug trafficking. The U.S. alleges that Venezuela has engaged in state-sponsored drug trafficking. So that's an accusation, that's an allegation. Not proven, we don't know it for sure. There are a lot of reasons to think that Maduro was very friendly with these cartels. So this is a big part of it. Drug trafficking, that's the main stated reason. Okay, oil. This is a big one. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Now, there's a difficulty in actually extracting the oil. That's a whole nother topic, but there's a ton of oil in Venezuela if you can get to it. And Trump very openly said that the U.S. would restore Venezuela's oil infrastructure and compensate U.S. companies that lost out in seizures. So this is a whole story that we don't need to go into right now, but with just a little common sense, we can understand. Huge oil reserves. Trump is very much a business-minded president. Oil has something to do with it. Getting access to that oil clearly has something to do with it. Immigration, we talked about that. That plays a role as well. Gold. Venezuela, again, there's a ton of resources in Venezuela. Venezuela's vast gold reserves have helped the country navigate U.S. pressure over many years. This is because they have valuable resources that they're able to build an economy outside of U.S. control. Here it talks about China, who buys Venezuelan oil. Iran and its Lebanese proxy Hezbollah, linked to arms with Venezuela, grounded in opposition to U.S. foreign policy. Russia and Venezuela have also a long-standing partnership. So this is hinting at certain things. I want to dig into that. All of these reasons connect to this greater geopolitical conflict that's going on. I call it the West versus the rest, because we think of the West led by the US, but involving a lot of other countries, as the dominant power in the world. You only hold on to power in the geopolitical context when you are aligned with other countries and other forces that share interests with you. And together you're able to protect interests that you all share. So I call this the West against the rest, because in the allegiances that the US has, there are non-Western countries. Like take, for example, that Venezuela. Venezuela is a Western country, but it is not part of the West. The West is sort of the predominant force. The US, NATO allies, Western Europe, those are kind of the dominant forces in this axis. But there's a lot of other players. Venezuela is a hub for the rest, existing geographically in the West. That's what makes it such a threat, and that's why all this controversy is centering around Venezuela. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State under Trump, said this to justify their actions in Venezuela. We are not going to have a country like Venezuela in our own hemisphere. In the sphere of control and the crossroads for Hezbollah, for Iran, and for every other malign influence in the world, that's just not going to exist. Why is he bringing Middle Eastern powers into this? Venezuela represents the interests of the rest, the powers that oppose Western influence and the US. Let's take a look at this article here. Now, Jamestown Foundation is the least biased on balanced story selection with minimal editorialization. Try to use resources that are fairly objective, or at least are willing to show multiple angles on a story. I just want to look at these quick bullet points that it makes. Russia leverages Venezuela to expand influence in Western Hemisphere. Okay, so Moscow has condemned the US capture of Venezuelan president, that's obvious. Kremlin's relationship with Venezuela enables Moscow to project power beyond Cuba in the Western Hemisphere. Russian energy firms have gained oil stakes in repayment in kind for investments in Venezuela, so all part of this economy that subverts the US, or is attempting to more and more. Arms transfers. So it's not just an economic threat, it's a real military threat, right? In order to back up power and control economically, you need a good military. That's just how it works in the world. So that's the connection to Russia. Venezuela is a hub for Russian power in the West. Okay? Then we have China. China is also a part of this. Maduro's capture is a blow to China, so yes, that's true. But on Chinese social media, it's being hailed as a blueprint for Taiwan. So that's demonstrating how it's setting this precedent that, hey, if the US can go in and capture a foreign leader, why can't we do that to Taiwan? This demonstrates that this is a dangerous precedent. China and Venezuela have maintained close relationships for decades, forged by a shared political ideology and mutual distrust for a world led by the United States. So there's all this expression, very clear expression of anti-US, anti-Western sentiments through an all-weather strategic partnership established in 2023. So they have this strategic partnership. Beijing pulled Caracas, which is the capital of Venezuela, further into its orbit with deepened economic aid and diplomatic support. The bulk of Venezuelan oil exports flow to China, so there's economic ties. And Chinese companies finance extensive infrastructure projects and investments across the country, with Beijing lending billions. Trump's move has appeared to upend this relationship, at least for now, because Maduro was buddy-buddy with the leaders of China and Russia. So by removing him, it makes it a lot more difficult for China to have a good relationship with the now president of Venezuela, who the US is warning, don't go down the same road as Maduro, or we'll come for you. That's the implication. Okay, and now let's get into Iran. Okay, now this is CSIS, Center for Strategic International Studies. It's a prominent bipartisan Washington, D.C. based think tank focused on international policy. Key aspects of bias and perspective, establishment, center focus. So it's viewed as centrist. It's not necessarily promoting one political agenda or another that bridges the gap between Republican and Democratic parties. Okay, so it's a fairly trustworthy resource. Just this first paragraph really kind of sums things up. Iran has made headlines over the past week. So this was back in 2020. So this has been going on for a long time. Iran has made headlines over the past week after successfully shipping multiple fuel tankers to Venezuela. Again, this economy that bypasses the US, where fuel shortages have spread throughout the country, the move has raised concerns in the United States and throughout the Western Hemisphere regarding a strengthening alliance between the two nations that have consistently harbored anti-US sentiment. So that is the through line that connects Russia, China, and Iran and Venezuela. They have a lot of resources that they bring to the table. They have trade, they have influence, and they're helping each other build this system that functions on its own. So they're a huge lifeline to each other, especially Iran and Venezuela, because these are power dynamics. It's not like Russia and Venezuela, Russia and China, and all these leaders just love each other and are just always on the same page. They have their own interests to protect. The relationship between Venezuela and Iran is much more eye level because they have a lot less going on for them economically than Russia and China. So that makes this relationship between Iran and Venezuela a much tighter one. Because they're on the same level with each other. But there's an even deeper and more direct economic relationship between Iran and Venezuela, and it has to do with Hezbollah.
Okay, so here I elaborate on the relationship between Venezuela and Hezbollah, a recognized terror organization by the US, but it was just too much for this video, so I'm putting the link to that video in the description, and we'll continue on.
What connects the dots between all of these? So this is news that I have seen in no mainstream media outlets. I've really only seen it in Arab news resources or from left-wing sources. I read about it here in the Middle East Monitor. So the Middle East Monitor is known for a strongly pro-Palestinian, pro-Islamist, and pro-Muslim Brotherhood editorial orientations. So this news outlet is not a friend of the West, but in spite of its bias, it is known to be accurate, or to report accurately. It doesn't just spread lies. Iran, China, and Russia formally signed a comprehensive strategic pact, marking one of the most consequential shifts in 21st century international relations. So that's where the loaded language might play a role. Maybe this is not the most consequential shift in the 21st century international relations. The pact comes against the backdrop of decades of growing cooperation between these three states to deepen economic, political, and defense ties. China and Russia have conducted regular joint naval drills in the Indian Ocean and Gulf waters, exercises that Iran has participated in as well. What makes today's signing significantly different is that it explicitly combines the three powers in a coordinated framework, aligning them on issues ranging from nuclear sovereignty and economic cooperation to military coordination and diplomatic strategy. In the long term, the pact accelerates the multipolar restructuring of international relations. So is Trump sending soldiers into Venezuela to capture its president justified? Honestly, I don't know. But it certainly puts a damper on the Russia-Iran-China alliance, and it helps the US hold on to dominance of global affairs. So I think the questions we can ask ourselves here are, is having an alliance between Russia, China, and Iran a good thing for the world? Because that's what the capture of Maduro helps prevent. Or would it cause more problems? So my take on this is that in situations like this, we don't have the luxury of looking for a perfect outcome. That's just not a fair expectation to have. We need to look at the practical options on the table and think to ourselves, what is best? Is the US and its allies a better alternative than the Chinese Communist Party? Are they a better option than Russia? Where would you fare better if you protested in the streets? When reviewing risky actions like what Trump did in Venezuela, context is everything. And there's usually more going on than meets the eye. If you like this type of content, if you want to see more of it, go ahead and subscribe to my channel because there's more to come.